$15, unexpectedly, in the hands of a woman who has bought nothing for herself in years. Kate Chopin, 1897, told slowly, so nothing runs away from you. Listen for the moment her careful plan quietly stops mattering. Come along, quietly. Mrs. Sommers counted the money a second time, there on the kitchen table. $15. It had come to her unexpectedly, and it seemed to her an enormous, weighty sum. She pressed the old purse flat against her body, the way a woman does when the bills inside are not yet spent and already precious. For 2 days she did not part with a cent of it. She sat instead with a pencil and a scrap of paper, and she planned. This was not a woman who bought things quickly. Mrs. Sommers was a creature of habit, a person whose small routines almost never change, and her habit, for years now, had been to make $1 do the work of 2. The plan, when it was finished, was a small work of art. So much for shoes for Janie, which would outlast 2 cheap pairs. So much for Mag's dress. So much for stockings for all 4 children, new ones, whole ones, an end to the endless darning. There would be caps for the boys and hats for the girls, and something over. She lay awake arranging the figures and felt the peculiar enthusiasm of a woman handed, briefly, a little power. Of the past she said nothing, even to herself. There had been better days before, but she had learned that dwelling on them is a kind of illness, and she had no appetite for illness. She put herself last, as always, her own needs behind everyone else's, and she was practiced at it. On the appointed day she went out into the streets, and she had eaten nothing since morning. Women with 4 children do not always remember to eat, they remember the children instead. By the time she reached the great department store, the crowd pressed on all sides and her strength was going. She found herself seated at a counter. She could not have said how glad only to have somewhere to be still. Her ungloved hand traveled along the counter without asking her permission and stopped on something soft. Something very soft. She looked down at a heap of silk stockings, black and lustrous, and at a small card, $1.98, reduced from $2.50. She knew better than to handle silk on a day like this. A woman who knows better does it anyway, sometimes. A feeling came over her, it arrived from nowhere and she could not have named it, and she did not lift her hand. Let us stop where she stopped and take 4 expressions from that counter. First, a creature of habit, a person whose small routines almost never change. Mrs. Sommers is a creature of habit, and her habit is thrift. Second, to put oneself last, to place your own needs behind everyone else's again and again until it no longer feels like a choice. She had put herself last for years. Third, a feeling comes over you. It arrives from nowhere, takes hold, and resists explanation. Something came over her at that counter. And fourth, to know better than to do something, to have the experience to avoid it. Notice the implication. When we say she knew better, we are also saying, gently, that she did it anyway. Now, back to that hand on the silk. She did not ask the price again, and she did not calculate. She said she would take them, and she paid $1.98 without a second thought, instantly, with no weighing up at all. The girl wrapped the parcel. Mrs. Sommers put it under her arm and carried it away. Her face showed neither shame nor triumph. Then she went up to the ladies' waiting room, found a corner nobody wanted, and did something she had not done in a very long time. She drew off her old cotton stockings and pulled the silk ones on. For a while she simply sat with her foot on a cushioned stool, looking at the shining thing her own leg had become. She was not thinking about Janie's shoes. She was not thinking at all. After a while the silk stockings suggested boots. That is how such an afternoon proceeds, not by decision, but by suggestion. She walked into the shoe department, sat down, and let a young clerk fit her, and she did not apologize for her feet, because the stockings were beautiful and the stockings were hers. All her life she had bought boots that would last. Today she asked for boots that fitted, and paid a price she would ordinarily have called impossible. The sheer luxury of it, sheer here simply meaning total, unmixed with anything else, kept her quiet on the stool, listening to her own heart. Then she paid, and did not count the change. At the glove counter, a young woman drew a pair of kid gloves over her hand and smoothed them at the wrist, and the 2 of them looked for a moment at that small, neat, gloved hand, as though it belonged to someone with an easier life. Then 2 expensive magazines, of the kind she used to read when she had been accustomed to other things. She carried them without paper or string and liked the weight of them. She was not spending money now so much as abandoning herself to the afternoon. To abandon yourself to something is to stop resisting it entirely and let it have you. For once in her life, on this one occasion unlike all the others, nobody's shoes were under consideration but her own. 4 more before the last act. 1. Without a second thought, instantly with no hesitation. She paid for the silk without a second thought. 2. The sheer luxury of something sheer intensifies, the luxury is complete, unmixed. The sheer luxury of boots that fitted kept her silent on that stool. 3. To abandon oneself to something, to stop resisting a feeling and let it carry you. 4. For once in her life on this single occasion, unlike every other. And notice how this story is told. When you hear that the plan was a small work of art, nobody says she thought so. The telling has slipped inside her mind and borrowed her voice. Listen for that in what follows. She might have gone home then. Instead, she went into a restaurant she had only ever walked past. Thick carpet, tall windows, nobody hurrying anybody. A waiter looked at her, a shabby dress, good gloves, 2 expensive magazines, and set a table for one by the window with perfect courtesy. She ordered very little. 6 oysters, a cutlet, something sweet, a glass of wine, a small cup of black coffee. She ate slowly. She cut the pages of her magazine between courses with the blade of her knife. A deep contentment came over her that had nothing to do with the food and everything to do with a table where nobody needed anything from her. She paid, left a coin for the waiter, and he bowed as though she were a duchess. There was a theater across the way and a matinee already begun. She went in with the crowd and found a seat among brilliant women who had come to be seen, and quieter ones there, like her, only for the play. It is doubtful whether anyone in that hall took it in as completely as she did. She gathered the whole of it, the stage, the costumes, the orchestra, the perfume, the shine, and abandoned herself to it entirely, laughing and crying with the actors as though this had always been her Wednesday afternoon. She knew better, of course. She knew exactly what a matinee costs, measured in caps and stockings. She stayed until the very last curtain. When it ended, the audience came out into the low afternoon light and scattered, the way a dream scatters. Mrs. Sommers went to the corner and waited for the cable car. A man opposite her lowered his newspaper and studied her, plainly unable to make her add up the worn dress, the new boots, the magazines, the small gloved hands folded on top of them. Had he been able to read what was written in her face, he might have been surprised, because there was no regret in it, and no resolve either. There was only a wish, sharp and quiet and entirely her own, that the car would go on with her and never stop anywhere at all. So that was Kate Chopin's, a pair of silk stockings, from 1897. $15 came to a creature of habit who had put herself last so long that she had stopped noticing. For 2 days the money belonged to the children. Then, at a crowded counter with nothing in her since morning, a feeling came over her and the plan quietly stopped mattering. Silk paid for without a second thought, boots that fitted, gloves, magazines, a table for one, a matinee she abandoned herself to. 2 questions before we finish. 1. What does this single afternoon tell us about all the years before it? 2. Why does she wish the car would never stop? Pause here and answer out loud, in full sentences. Chopin never tells us what is waiting at home, and she never once calls the afternoon a mistake. That restraint is the whole art of it. For the language, run the episode again and let the 8 expressions arrive in their places, then read along with the subtitles only on a 3rd pass. That order is what makes them stay. Another classic is already waiting on your screen in a colder country with a far less gentle narrator. Let it play, and subscribe so the next one finds you. Until then, spend something small on yourself, deliberately.